Welcome to I Am Nala podcast, brought to you by Nala Feminist Collective or Nala Fem, where we strive towards the liberation of African women and girls. We are a group of feminist leaders in politics and activism with a mission to foster, embolden, and mobilize women and girls from Africa and the diaspora for transformative change. I am your host, Aya Shebi, founder of Nala Fem, and on this second season of I Am Nala podcast, we raise awareness during the 16 days of activism. We talk about Africa Young Women Beijing Plus 25 Manifesto and its 10 demands. Today, our conversation will be around Demand 4 of the manifesto on access to justice and protection. And I am so thrilled to welcome my sister Rosebell as my guest today. Rosebell is a feminist writer, human rights defender, and many other things. I can't wait to unpack. And so I want you to tell us in 3 words, who is Rosebell?
Thank you so much. I am a Ugandan feminist, currently based in Dakar, and I love to document the realities of women and tell women's stories.
That's amazing. I actually, when I first came across your writing, it seems you have this bold claiming of women with diverse gender identities, which is a bit of a challenge to talk about on the continent. So tell us what really inspired you to do this work, which is not easy to talk about these things. It's not popular, and it's pretty much about challenging other views. So what inspired you and how do you find it writing about that?
I think it's very important for us as activists to strive all the time to be as inclusive as possible. So definitely part of it is like inherited. My father, my mom are very, very strong characters. So they say what they want. Even with them growing up, I never felt like the need to just shrink myself. I always said what I want. So I think it comes from that. But to be able to be inclusive, some people are bold, but they're bold and they're harmful to many people on the continent. But to be bold and still be effective in advocating for all people who are marginalized in our continent means that you have to educate yourself in ways socialization has taught you to marginalize other people. So even as we advocate as young women, we must understand that there's always somebody else who is more marginalized because of another identity, because of another something. So we have to invest in knowledge, but more importantly, to be humble, to know that what we see as normal has not, it's part of a system that has been instilled. So how do we question every day? So for me, I think that I've been bold, like naturally bold, but to be bold, to be more representative means learning, means listening, and means understanding that we are in a constant state of learning and, more important, questioning ourselves. We can't question the world. We can't demand from the world unless we demand from ourselves to unlearn those harmful, toxic traits that the world has instilled in us. So for me, it starts there. It starts from who am I, whose operation am I contributing to? And how do I unlearn from that I'm not just a simply victim or just because of my gender, because even within that gender, I'm still privileged in many ways. So questioning power and privilege brings us to that place where you can boldly stand for all the people. And I don't need to fully understand everything. I think that it starts with the step to really know that you must accept and extend this freedom that you're looking for yourself to other people. You don't have to know everything about even things are complicated, but you must come with an open mind.
Absolutely, 100%. But I want to know, where did it come from? Is it a personal experience? Is it some event that happened in your life? Is it someone who inspired you to start this work? Where did it come from?
I think building on what I said, like really finding myself being outspoken and the need to understand socialization, like from the home you come from, is very important. It's the first foundation, whether you can claim your voice. I never in many ways, growing up, felt marginalized in my own home in terms of speaking up as a woman, as a young woman. My mother is very straight up, does not, sugarcoat anything. So I get that, and so are many women in my life and in my family. So having those kind of role models to know that you can live a different life and still challenge what the status quo is very important. But also through education. My background, I'm a journalist. I was trained as a journalist. I practiced for over 10 years as a journalist. I still write. You cannot fully comprehend people's realities unless you're open to learning about them. And you can't come to people's tables bringing your baggage and your own experiences to judge them. You have to come empty and say, I'm here to listen. So for me, I think journalism really challenged me to listen to alternatives and realities that I did not know even existed, that are so different from mine, because that's the only way you can tell someone's story. You're not there to inject it with your own realities, but rather to give them a platform where they can truly tell their own story, and you're just simply carrying it, right? So yeah. I think journalist, that's my foundation, and the foundation of journalism being ethical and being fair hearing of people. It doesn't matter whether you disagree with them, you have to give them a fair hearing. So I think that grounded me in kind of struggling, the struggle for justice, to understand that as a young journalist, I covered a lot court hearings from trials of political opponents on treason, terrorism. So I understood by the age of 20, I'm in courts running around and understanding the justice system and the processes. So these really grounded me in understanding that the justice system doesn't see us the same, that there are different powers at play.
Absolutely. And that's a great transition to my next question, because you signed African Young Women Manifesto and you championed Demand 4, which is really about access to justice and protection for young women. And people of gender diverse identity also contribute to, this marginalized discourse on protection. How do you really explain? And you said you run around and you talk to all these policymakers and lawyers and, people in the court, but how do you explain to them inclusion and protection really matters? Nowadays, it seems like people are challenging simple concept that we coexist with, but how do you do that?
I think we must realize that the struggle for freedom is not linear. So sometimes there are times we have actually gained a lot of momentum. We think we're there. Look at girls' rights, to education right now being rolled back by a pandemic and exposing our systems as not as protective as we wanted to believe we were of girls, and the sheer sexual violence that is happening in homes everywhere, things we have hidden from for a long time. The pandemic has exposed us to that. So I think that you have to go back to knowing that freedom is not a linear, the struggle is not linear. Sometimes we're up, sometimes we're down. So and the only way we can expand, we can get our freedom is to hold no other person, in an oppressive state. So if you're arguing for your rights and at the same time looking down on other people, then I don't think you're free, because your freedom should not entail you taking away from another person. That's how I understand the meaning of freedom. Like you are not threatened. You should ask yourself, if you're threatened by someone else who's seeking their freedom, then are you free? Why do you feel threatened? I think that what we see, the backlash and people trying to, it's all about control. It's about power, and as soon as the place of women move a needle higher, people feel threatened. So everybody who is privileged would always feel threatened. And that's where, for me, inclusivity comes from. When we see the voices, for example, of gender and sexual minorities on the continent who have been very marginalized and invisibilized for generations, like when they start speaking out and become visible, we even see backlash from women's movements. And then you ask yourself, so what privilege are you trying to protect that you don't want sexual minorities and gender minorities to get? And ask yourself,
is it a generational question, do you think?
It's very much a generational question, but also it's also exposes us to the work of decolonization we have not done, because at the independence movement, we're Africans, we're Black people, we're fighting for freedom, but the nuance of the role of women what about the place of sexual minorities? The deep reflection that is required to understand what colonialism did to us, that is still doing to us. The laws, African societies did not litigate people's bodies intensely as we saw this kind of Victorian European understanding of gender. We know from all African countries and research that even up to today, that there were various forms of gender. Gender was not man and woman, masculine and female, was not that binary. Very many societies in Africa, we even had woman to woman marriages for reproduction, for economic purposes, for all these other reasons. It was more nuanced. But then we enter into the colonial phase, and we have to ask ourselves, when we are asking for liberation from colonialism and decolonizing, what are those aspects we are refusing? We are trying to think that colonialism didn't affect our culture, but it did. That was the first insult. It was the first assault that it did to really dislocate on who you are. And that includes our gender and what we perceive of gender roles, what we perceive of gender power dynamics in our society, and how the gender and class come to intersect, who gets access to education, then who becomes the one who has a voice. Whereas before then, it wasn't the reality. So we need to stop cherry picking, decolonization on, okay, we need the education curriculum, we need this, we need to rename our lakes. Yes, please rename the streets, rename the lakes. But what about the place of women? And how did colonialism place so many people in a space of oppression? Because colonialism did not impact all of us the same. It created ripple effects where we continue to hate each other. So for me, it's about understanding the long-lasting legacies of colonialism, but also juxtaposing it on new and emerging forces that are trying to take away our rights.
100%. So since you are a writer, you must be a vivid reader. So I want to know who really inspires you as a feminist writer.
So I would begin like a fresh voice, a very necessary story, which a book I've just actually reviewed. I think all young African feminists, very African young women and people of different genders need to read The Sex Lives of African Women by Nana Dakour, who is a Ghanaian feminist. So it's a very important book that is freshly out. Check it out. It's a very important conversation on sexual pleasure and sexual autonomy of women of all diversities, of Black and Afro-descendant. Yeah. So I am very much inspired by her work, which is also building on past feminists in the continent. And definitely Stella Nyanzi, I worked closely on her case and advocating for her release, and her poetry and the way she kind of, there's this work academia is, and sometimes there are things we can't access because of class, because you think academic writing is just supposed to limit people access. And Stella Nyanzi kind of writes in a very accessible way, and the way she took up Facebook, it also shows the intersection of using technologies to make your work and your voice accessible to very many people. So I love her writing. No Roses from My Mouth is one of the very important poetry collections that I would want someone to look at. And of course, last but not least, there's a whole long list of Black feminists, definitely, from the US, from Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, from scholars like Bailey, who coined, Moya Bailey, who coined intersectionality. All those are people that inspire me, and they show me the need to take academia and theorizing very seriously, because sometimes we are very busy in our field, running on the streets, in the communities, but we need to be grounded also in theory, people who labor to give us the labels and the words to describe the things that we are struggling with. So I'm always impressed by the work of academia, Professor Sylvia Tamale in Uganda, and many other feminists on the continent, to be honest. The list is really long, but really Black feminists are very important. They made me understand actually deeply what racism is, which in a way that I could not have understood. So we need to understand beyond just the African continent, but more also Africans in the diaspora and how they experience these oppressions. And we need to listen and read them.
I think our listeners have a great list for this week to explore, and myself, I will look into some of them. My last question to you is, what would be your advice to the younger version of Rosebell as a young woman and a girl?
So young Rosebell was always fairy and always out to speak for herself. But I would say that increasingly I realized that it has taken me so long to claim my sexual autonomy, to understand what sexual autonomy means to me as a Black African woman. So I would tell young Rosebell to explore more, to give herself a chance to really go beyond the very religiosity that you're instilled in about your body and what you can do with it and you can't do with it. I would want her to access so much education on sexuality education for her to understand her body in time, to be able to enjoy responsibly.
Wow, and that's a great advice also to all the young women out there. Is there anything else you want to tell the young women listeners who are really inspired by your work?
Absolutely. I think that as you work, take care of yourself, find a good support system. Sometimes, we are young, we think we have all the energy, but you burn out very quickly. Take care of yourself, surround yourself with people who support you. And we live in a society that pits us against each other. Avoid that, because each and every one of us is carved out to do what they do best for themselves and for the community. So always look out for the collective, but take care of yourself. But more important, just, rise above this patriarchal stereotyping and socializing that you have to compete with other women. You absolutely don't have to. You have to support each other and raise each other up.
Absolutely, and that's the spirit of Nala Femme, us coming together as feminists in our own rights, doing amazing work in our countries and communities, but we recognize and we know that only together, only supporting each other, only in sisterhood that we can advance the gender agenda. So thank you so much, Rosebell. Your work is so inspiring. Your words are so challenging and provoking, and we need more of that. We need to talk about intersectionality and feminism and decolonization, and thank you for opening up a little bit of that discussion, and we hope to have more of that with you. So thank you, and also thank you for being a Nala Femme council member. We're so proud.
Let's do it. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye. You were listening to I Am Nala podcast. Check out nalafem.org/sign to learn more about our manifesto. Subscribe and see you in the next episode.